All right, as many of you, if not all of you know by now, XNA version 2.0 is out and available. Now, we've been using 1.0 refresh up until now, but with us getting started on Space Fighter, we're going to go ahead and upgrade. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to go out and relearn XNA altogether, but there are some new things that you're going to have to know. Now, Logan, you've had an opportunity to download and install XNA 2.0 downstairs. Found any major differences?
Not so much differences in things that would break past code or differences in the way you have to think. I have found a lot more in the way of things that have been added. XNA 2.0 simply has several new systems and abilities given. There are some changes. There are a few things that will break, generally when types have changed name or when certain calls will require a different type.
Okay.
Though it's generally not a major change to port code from XNA 1 over to XNA 2.
So it's not a major undertaking?
No, it's usually very quick and painless.
Okay. As a matter of fact, in this video, we're going to talk about where they can get 2.0 at. We'll just walk them through that and then talk about them getting it set up. But you're going to actually demonstrate taking like precision and getting it upgraded to 2.0.
Exactly. It is worth noting that XNA 2.0 does not open XNA 1.0 games.
Very interesting. Okay.
So there is an upgrade wizard provided to allow you to port a project or a project from XNA 1 over to XNA 2.
And why is that?
Well, see, the solution structure, the project structure has changed.
Okay.
Between XNA 1 and 2. So there are differences that Visual Studio has to handle internally. And therefore, the file format of the projects in XNA 1 are no longer compatible with XNA 2.
Okay, sounds good. So first of all, we get it from where?
Well, we can get XNA, we can get the distributions from the XNA Creators Club. You can see this is the site that we currently have open. That is creators.xna.com.
Okay.
Now, at the time of this recording, you can see XNA 2.0 plastered all over the front page. But if you're coming to the site at a later date and time and are looking for the files to install, they can be found up under the Education tab under the Getting Started section.
Okay.
If we go over to the Getting Started section, we see we have a lot of information and links about both XNA Game Studio 2.0 and the Project Upgrade Wizard. And it is worth noting that the Upgrade Wizard is a separate program. I mean, it integrates along with Visual Studio, but is a separate download.
Okay.
So if you install XNA 2.0, keep in mind that you will have to download this as a separate download to get the upgrade functionality. Though I'll also say that it's only about an 800K file, so it downloads and installs rather quickly.
Very nice.
Now, for us, since we've been running XNA 1.0, and we don't want to move away from that entirely. So,
when you say we don't want to move away from that entirely, what do you mean?
Well, XNA 1 and 2 can exist side by side on the same development machine.
Okay.
You don't have to uninstall XNA 1 in order to use XNA 2. If you simply leave 1.0 installed and install XNA Game Studio 2.0, your Visual Studio will be able to handle both 1.0 and 2.0 projects.
Now let me ask you this. Why would somebody want to leave 1.0 refresh on their computer?
Well, a lot of times past code can be useful just for reference purposes. You may not want to have to go in and upgrade all of your projects one by one all to the 2.0 format.
Gotcha.
You would, of course, want to work on things that are currently in development. But if you're keeping some code around only as reference or only to use just for past reference, it's very nice to be able to open those projects quickly without having to worry about upgrading them and copying them to a new project.
Sounds good. Okay.
So, if you're coming to this page looking for the setup for XNA Game Studio 2.0, you can drop under the link that describes using it as an existing XNA Game Studio user. Within that, after with the links to Visual Studio itself and the update, which if you haven't updated already, you would probably be wise to make sure that there's no inconsistencies or stability problems.
Actually, thinking about it, with Visual C# 2005 Express Edition Service Pack 1, isn't that required for 1.0 refresh?
I have not... To be honest, I haven't read this page in depth yet, so I'm not sure if it is stated here.
And it's only been months and months and months since I've read it. It seemed like it was required.
I had installed it months ago just to make sure that there was no inconsistencies between what we show and what an updated version would show. So we're running it. I've personally noticed no changes, but I mean it would be good to have set up
you are running it. Yeah,
to get optimum stability.
Yeah, let me just throw in there real quick before everybody jumps into the forums and says, "Hey, yeah, you have to or you don't have to." Yeah, it's been a long time. The bottom line is, as soon as the service pack became available, we got it and we upgraded. Now, when 1.0 refresh came out, it very well may have said you need to have service pack 1, and it may not have. It just seems to me like you had to have service pack 1 to install it. But anyways.
But and would be a good idea just to make sure that you don't have any inconsistencies between what we show and what you actually experience. But below the update, we finally have the heading for XNA Game Studio 2.0. This will give you access to the file that you need. As a matter of fact, if I click this, we should be redirected over to the Microsoft website under the download section, where we have the ability to download the file from which XNA 2.0 will set up.
Very nice.
So that is the key. That's what you need installed in order to be able to create and work with XNA 2.0 projects. Then, once again, below this heading, the upgrade wizard is mentioned here as well. So I would go ahead and grab that because more than likely you'll be in the middle of working on some game or some project, and you'll want to pull that over to 2.0 to make sure you take advantage of all of either the new features or some of the new Xbox features available.
Right. Okay, so once you get it installed, so at that point, launching it?
Well, launching it, in order to show that, we'll have to switch over to Visual Studio.
Okay.
Now, the key difference that you'll be able to see from within Visual Studio itself is from within the New Project window. You'll notice that in the past we had been working purely under the templates directly under Visual C#, where we have, of course, our Windows application and then our games. We have things like Windows Game, 360 Game, and so on. So this should all be familiar stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Below Visual C#, we have a new category added, XNA Game Studio 2.0. This category contains all of the new stuff for the 2.0 framework.
Nice.
And then generally all of these things will be labeled 2.0, things like the Windows game, the game library, even the starter kit. So you can see that the Space Wars starter kit has been ported to version 2.0.
Okay.
Now you'll also note that we have run the installer for the Project Upgrade Wizard. So we also have this icon. Keep in mind that you will not have this until you install that Project Upgrade Wizard setup file.
Okay, simple enough. So at this point right now, if we were to create a Windows game 2.0, can you just take a moment and walk through the basic template that it gives you and talk about some of the differences we're going to see?
It would be a good idea to do that because some things have changed, especially some of the very basic things about the game class. So we could very quickly load up a new game, Windows Game 2.0. I'll leave the name Windows Game 1.
Yeah, that sounds good.
We'll probably just discard this when we're done. This is just good to show what's new, what might have changed. All right, let's take a look at what things are immediately noticeable. First, if we look...
I see one right away. There's a sprite batch there. And every single thing that we create, you're always making a sprite batch.
So now the template for the game class includes the declaration of a sprite batch field.
Very nice.
You'll also note if we jump ahead a little bit and look in load content, we'll get to that in a second. But you can see that the sprite batch is also set up and ready for use. So all that's left for you to do is to go into Draw and to begin to use the sprite batch.
And I noticed something missing up there too.
Well, we no longer have a content manager field.
Yeah.
The content manager has been or is now handled as a public property to the game class. And this has two implications. One, it's handled behind the scenes in the game class itself, which means you do not see the field in your own instance of Game 1. The other thing is that the field is in fact public. As a matter of fact, if we look down here under the constructor where it is referenced for the first time, we could even right-click on it and go to Definition, bring up the metadata for the game class, and you'll see that Content Manager, named Content here, is a public property.
Gotcha.
And what's nice about this is if any other class holds a reference to your Game 1 instance, it will be able to reference the Content Manager, which could be useful for an auxiliary content loader or a texture manager or something of that nature.
Okay. Now, why did they do this?
Well, in my opinion, I think it just makes the content management system a little bit more flexible.
Okay.
One, it cleans up the game class template, so you have fewer fields you have to deal with. And second, it makes the content manager itself more easily accessible outside of the game class.
Right. Okay.
And while we're on the topic of the content management system, I should point out that the project, or the Windows game project itself, has changed a little bit. You'll notice that we have a new item here called Content. What this actually is a sub-project to the Windows game project. And what I mean by that is, as well as being the root location for all, I was going to say graphics, but generally any asset that the game needs that is managed by the content manager must now reside within this sub-project. The other reason that this is presented as a project instead of a simple folder is that if you are writing any custom content pipeline importers, they can be written as part of this sub-project. And the key benefit there is that you can more easily debug those importers in line with your game itself.
Nice.
Where I was starting to go with the content, the idea of the textures and data, is that the content manager now uses this project and contains a root directory. You'll notice that on this project itself, one of the files that we have is the content root directory named content, and then that is also referred to here in the constructor where the root directory is set.
Which means now when you create a folder like textures, etc., we're going to have another folder lower.
Exactly. This changes the structure a little bit. To demonstrate what I mean with that, I can go over to the content project and add a new folder. Let's say we were adding a textures folder.
Mm-hmm.
And if we add that textures folder, you'll note, you can't see the difference in here, but if we go to the projects folder for Visual Studio, there's our Windows game one we just created. There is no textures folder where we would normally be expecting one, but instead we have the sub-project. Within this project, among the other folders there is a textures folder.
Gotcha.
So keep that in mind for setting up content. That content is essentially a sub-project now. The other thing is that this folder can be changed if you would rather the folder be called something other than content at this level. You could go into the contents of project and change it to whatever you would like. Just remember to change it in the constructor as well to update the root directory field to point at that specific folder.
Okay.
Moving on from here, let's see, what do we have next to look at? There are two key methods inside of the game class that have changed in name and changed a little bit in their behavior, and that is the load content and unload content. These two methods have been added to XNA 2.0. Of course, the previous versions of these were called load graphics content and unload graphics content, each of them also having a Boolean parameter that told you whether or not you were loading all content, basically whether you were loading automatic content or manual content. That has been done away with, though the methods themselves still exist. If you use them, you'll get warnings in the compiler about an obsolete method being used. But these new methods, you'll note, do not have the parameter, so you don't have to worry about whether or not this is load all or not load all. This is just loading content, anything that needs to be loaded at game startup.
Okay.
So the only real key thing is, from a usage point of view, is just the fact that the names have changed and that the block inside is somewhat more simplistic. And let's see, moving on from that, I think that is all the major differences I wanted to touch on. I guess one thing I could point out, just very briefly, is that along with the content manager being a public property, if we look back at the game's metadata, the graphics device is also accessible through a public property, whereas before you had to look at this graphics device manager in the graphics field, and that would hold the graphics device itself. If you need access to the graphics device for some reason outside of the game, just remember that you have a property that will allow you direct access to that.
Gotcha. Very nice.
And I think that's all the major points that you need to be aware of when beginning from scratch with XNA 2.0.
So everything else looks the same. Update, draw.
Exactly. Update and draw.
I saw initialize. It looked good.
Yeah, initialize works the same. Update and draw, as far as I can tell, are exactly the same as they were before. Function exactly the same.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about porting our games over, upgrading them, updating them.
We'll take a look at that upgrade, or the project upgrade wizard.
Okay.
To do that, let's close out this project, and close out this metadata as well. I probably missed, close solution. And no, we don't need to save anything. Now, say for example we were working on the precision game, and now we've got 2.0 and we would like to take advantage of some 2.0 feature. So we would like to get the precision game upgraded to an XNA 2.0 project. So let's take a look at the process behind that. Whenever you're upgrading a project, really what's happening is that the upgrade wizard will read the old project and begin a completely brand new project in 2.0 format and simply read all the classes and information into that new project for you. So that is accessed by going to New Project. Make sure you're under the XNA Game Studio 2.0 section and grab the Project Upgrade Wizard. The first thing you'll need to provide is a name for the upgraded project. So in our case, we could call this Precision XNA 2. Into something like 2.0.
Okay.
Just something to indicate the difference, since we have a Precision folder project currently in place in our projects folder.
Right.
So we'll hit OK to this, and we're presented with the Upgrade Wizard's first screen. Now, what it needs to know is where your old project is located, so it can reference all of the classes and files. So we'll hit Browse, and we are currently under our Visual Studio Projects folder. From here, we'll jump into precision, and you'll note that we don't see anything in here because this is the folder in which the solution resides, and it's actually looking for a project file. So we'll have to go one level deeper, and there is our precision.csproj file. We'll hit open to that, and then we simply hit upgrade. And for a fraction of a second, you saw a screen flash up. That screen will, of course, take longer if you have more data, if you have more classes added, or if you have large files. You'll see that window as it copies and you could say replaces, but essentially it's just copying all of the data over to your new project. And it does give you a bit of a notice saying that whether or not the upgrade was successful, and then giving you a reminder that that there may be code changes between XNA 1.0 and 2.0.
Because this upgrade's not going in there and changing your code. It's not touching your code at all.
Exactly. All of the classes will remain unchanged. No code is going to be touched from here.
Okay.
So if we hit finish, we now have Precision XNA 2.0. You can see that we now have a content sub-project. And if we expand that, you can see that the upgrade wizard noticed that our textures folder had assets referenced by the project and made sure that that became part of the content sub-project, whereas classes had nothing to do with the content management system, so that folder was left at the main game project level.
Okay.
From here, of course, none of the classes themselves are open, and I'll hold off on that for a second. So now that we have the new project, let's see if it will build and run. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F5, and we'll let it build our new project for us. And we can see that the game does in fact run. And I'm very briefly looking around the room for an Xbox controller so I can jump into the game, make sure that everything is working. So we've got our splash screen. That loaded up just fine. We begin, and now we're playing Precision under the XNA 2.0 framework. So everything seems to have worked well.
Very nice.
So we'll exit back out of that. And I do want to point out a few things that showed up when we performed the build. You can see in the error list we got 2 warnings. And these warnings, if I click on the first one, goes over to the load graphics content method. And the warning is noting the fact that load graphics content is obsolete. And so it's imploring us to go and add the obsolete attribute to it. Really, it would be a good idea to simply switch over to the load content method, which would be a simple matter of changing the name and removing the parameter. Load content does not take in a Boolean parameter, so we'll erase that. That, of course, means that this if block has no reason to exist. So we'll wipe out the load all content if block and maybe fix some of the tabbing. And then the second error was for unload graphics content, so we could give the same treatment. We could change this override over to look at unload content and remove the unload all content parameter.
Okay.
So we don't need this block. Really, I'm pausing for a second because I'm trying to remember if content.onload needs to be called. Do you remember in our other one? I don't think there was anything in here for unload.
To be honest with you, I have not yet had an opportunity to play with 2.0, so I do not know.
I'll verify as a one last minute step, but I don't think there was.
Okay.
So we're simply going to wipe everything out, and since we weren't unloading content, it shouldn't cause any issue. So if we build, and I meant to build instead of run, but that's all right. As we built, that cleared up all of our warnings.
Nice.
And our game is now a 2.0 project with no warnings on build.
Outstanding. Now, if you want to confirm that real quick, we can go ahead and create close that solution, create a new.
Let me jump over it. Created the folder. I'll just bring that solution back very briefly, just to make sure that in the proper usage of unload content,
yeah, you were right.
There is no reference to the content manager.
Very nice.
That threw me off for a second because I was looking at the content unload and that looked important. That was some code that had been placed there by the old template.
Right.
But no, under the new template, you don't have to worry about unloading anything explicitly. You only have to worry about, as it says here, non-content manager content here.
Well, that's having just switched, yesterday I believe it was. I have not yet had an opportunity to actually take a peek at it myself. So this is a first look for me as well as maybe some of our students.
Exactly. I was just making sure that things physically ran within the new framework.
All right, what about some other things? I know that we did this bonus video recently where we showed people how to put together a very rough utility of a sprite sheet builder. Any differences there?
There are a few there. That the sheet builder utility got a little bit more, you could say, low level with its handling of textured data. We had to look at individual pixel data for some of the load operations. And in that case, working with the back buffer and the texture creation, some of the types have changed a little bit.
Okay.
So let's take a look at upgrading that tile sheet builder. So we'll go through and do the same process. We'll begin the same process. We'll use the upgrade wizard to make, call this tile builder 2.0, or XNA 2.0.
Okay.
And once again, we'll look for that project. So we'll jump back up a few levels, grab the sprite sheet builder, and grab its project. So we'll upgrade. Everything has gone successfully. We hit finish. Here is our new project. We try to build the project, and aside from the warnings, we also get some errors down here.
Okay.
Let's jump to the first error, and that error is within load graphics content where we are creating the target texture. You'll notice over here what it's actually looking at is that the resource usage type does not exist anymore. Resource usage has been taken out of XNA Framework 2.0. If I invoke the IntelliSense, the tooltip for this thing?
Right.
For some reason, words were escaping me as to what that thing is. The tooltip that shows you the parameters, the parameter list for the method call. You can see that the type that it is expecting here is a texture usage type, not a resource usage. So we're going for a resolve target. Now this will change a little bit, I believe. First, we need to look at the texture. Where is it? Texture usage. And there's so many things that say texture here that this needs to be expanded text. It's actually going to require that I know how to spell texture. All right, but anyway, it's texture usage type, and we have where before we were using resolve target. We don't have resolve target in here. Instead, we're going to select none. And you'll see in a second, resolve targets are handled differently at the texture level itself. But we'll get to that as we need to. Now if we build, that should take care of that first error. Now we move on farther in the line where we are creating the texture. The next thing that we are missing is resource management mode. And instead that is, actually looking here at the parameters, that parameter is simply omitted in the creation of a texture 2D.
Simple
so we
enough.
simply don't have to worry about resource management mode. And that clears up the second error. And now if we move on from here, the next thing we have to look at is that resolve back buffer no longer takes in a texture 2D. Instead, it takes in a resolve texture 2D type. So we could go and simply redeclare our target texture as a resolve texture 2D. So we'll jump up to its definition here and change it to a resolve texture 2D type.
Okay.
We build, and that fixes that error. And the last error here is now we're saying new texture 2D, and that needs to be new resolve texture 2D. So let's see, resolve texture 2D, and yes, following this error by error means that we've now changed the parameters that need to be updated. What is it? There's one. Oh, I guess there is no texture usage. Yeah, what I was getting at there is, if you're going at this from the beginning, I was just showing this an error by error method.
Mm-hmm.
And we corrected all the errors for a texture 2D, and then we changed the texture 2D to a resolve texture 2D, and resolve texture 2D just simply doesn't have a texture usage parameter. So if we build, that takes care of all of our errors, and everything is cleaned up. Though we should probably go ahead and take out our load graphics content and change that to load content.
And then take the if block out.
Just as we had done in Precision. And then take all of this code, tab it back a little bit, and then look at unload graphics content, change it to unload content, remove the parameter, and remove any call to anything dealing with the content management system. So now if we build, that takes care of everything, though I'm not sure how well it will run since I have cleaned out the working folder on our system.
Right.
I could verify that it still runs, and we get a very nice look at what was last on the back buffer from our run of Precision.
Yes, we do.
All right, I'm curious now. Was it able to create the folder? If I had had the output folder, it should have been able to read that. I am just curious enough, though, to want to create that folder. I'm curious to see if it can dump the garbage that was left on the back buffer to a file. And unfortunately, where was I having it output to? Output tile sheet. Yeah, I guess maybe not so much. I'm surprised that it's running at all with the texture, because it's interesting. Since last time we ran into this, we were killed with an exception.
Mm-hmm.
Since this texture 2D doesn't or the textures don't get created. So really, this should have nothing to resolve to. I mean, unless I accidentally wiped out that call to build texture, but that's...
Oh, there it is.
Oh, I see. Only if directory exists does build texture get called.
Well, there you go.
Okay, so I guess that makes sense then. We do have this guy is getting things resolved. We're just never saving.
Gotcha.
But again, the application does work. If we restore all the paths, then everything will work just fine. I have, in fact, tested this on my machine, so I know that the program is still sound.
Okay, cool.
We just needed to get those types patched up, get everything set up to where all the calls were expecting the correct types.
Sure. And in case anyone was having any trouble following what was just going on there, is basically up under your CS folder where we dump all of the images and different assets that we're going to use in a video demonstration. That had all been wiped out before this video. Yeah.
Before the video, we had things like input 1, input 2, and output.
That's right.
And those were the folders relied upon by this utility.
Exactly. Right now, we're just walking through the different applications that we've created throughout the XNA class that require some attention. But outside of this, everything else, no-brainers, right? I mean, we really haven't gotten super deep into some of the things that we're going to be doing. That's going to require, a change in workflow for 2.0.
So if you've been following the methodologies we use behind projects up until this point, it's unlikely that you would have to change very much.
Right.
It usually only results in changes if you work with the back buffer, if you were working with resolve targets, or if you were working with custom or procedurally generated textures.
Right.
Other than that, most of the changes are on the addition or on things that have been added.
Cool things that have been added, which we'll actually be talking about some of those very soon. So with that pretty much everything you wanted to talk about?
That is, again, just showing what the differences are, what a new project looks like, and considerations you might have to look at when porting games from XNA 1 over to XNA 2.0.
Okay, sounds good. So with that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.